Welcome to The Work Within, where we have conversations about mental health and faith to help you live with greater connection and wholeness in your everyday life. The Work Within is a podcast of the Watershed initiative, supporting the mental health needs of the local church. Thanks for listening. Hey, welcome to The Work Within. My name is John Lynn, and I'm your host. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Laura Harrison and Ly Tran. Welcome, y'all. It's good to see you.
Hey, glad to be here.
Good morning, John.
Yeah. Today, the thing that we want to talk about has to do with how do we set off on a good course for the rest of the year. And last episode, Paul McMullen and I, we talked about some spiritual practices that can be very helpful for grounding us and centering us and helping us live the kind of lives that we want to. But one of the things that we weren't really able to delve deeply into, which I think is so important, is the role of community and friendship and connection in fostering the kind of lives that I really believe God has called us to live. So I was really hoping that we could talk about that today, looking at this subject from the vantage point of what does mental health have to inform us about why, and give us some nuance as to why it's so valuable and important in the way God designed us, as well as what might be some micro habits or practices that we can all begin to integrate into our lives this year. And hopefully, for those who are tuning in, it'll help your family life, your relationship with the people that you love and care about. Maybe you're part of a small group and they can influence how you think about your small group, or even the relationships at work. So we hope this has some broad-reaching impact. But before we jump into that, I do want to make two quick invitations. The first is this: if this podcast has been helpful to you, we would love if you would give us a rating or a review and subscribe. That really does help us a lot. And then secondly, we would love the privilege of being able to support you in your own mental health journey, in your journey as you pursue greater connection and wholeness in your life. And so if you're looking for a therapist, please reach out to us. We'd love to help you find one that's a good fit in your price range and all those things. The new year could be a great time to invest in yourself. So we hope you'll take us up on that offer. If you're a new client, you can get 10% off your first 5 sessions of therapy with us. All right, so let's get into it. To frame this conversation, I wanted to briefly share 2 recent experiences that I had, then talk about a Harvard study. So the other day, my family and I, we went to one of our favorite places for lunch, and we sat down together. And it's one of those places that we go for comfort, and we have great conversation. And we all noticed the family sitting next to us. It was a family of 4, husband, wife, and then 2 kids, maybe middle school and elementary school aged. And what stood out to all of us is every single one of them had a device in their hand. And throughout the entire meal, their attention was just rapt attention to their phone and social media, whatever they happened to be looking at. And I remember just looking, and we all looked at each other because in our family, we have a no device kind of policy when we have meals together. And I just remember thinking, oh man, that it feels like a missed opportunity. Now, I don't know if they felt that, but that's what I was thinking. Okay. So that was one experience. And I know that's very, very common. And again, if that's you and that describes your family, no judgment there, just an observation, right? And we want to think about, well, what does that mean for us? A second experience I had recently, I sat down with an old college friend that I have lost touch with and have not seen in years, really. And we got back in touch, and we were reminiscing about old times, and we apologized to each other for how poorly we had kept in touch with each other over the years, and just how bad we were at doing that. And we were remarking that our wives were so much better about keeping in touch with friends and preserving those relationships. And I appreciate what my friend said. He was really honest. He said, I know maintaining friendship is really important. I really believe that. But at the end of the day, my attention is on my wife and my children. And that's kind of good enough for me. I don't feel a need for more than that. I don't feel that felt need to go beyond that and go out and hang out with my buddies. And I just thought, man, yeah, I get it. I totally get that. And I think a lot of men, especially, would also resonate with that. Okay, so just two experiences. We'll just kind of hang those up there. Now, I wanted to talk about that Harvard study. They followed a group of men over decades, I think beginning in the 1930s. It's called the Study of Adult Development. And they followed alumni from Harvard and then as well as a group of inner city men. So very diverse experiences. They were tracking and measuring as life progressed. What were the key indicators or predictors of happiness, well-being, emotional, relational, spiritual, and even longevity, how long they lived. And then later on, the study would include spouses and their children. And what did they find? Okay, the ones that were doing the best, the ones that were thriving and happy and healthy were the ones who had a deep sense of connection with other people. And this is so fascinating. More specifically, the study found that safe, secure relationships in midlife predicted health in old age better than cholesterol levels, which I'm kind of like, okay, hey, that's good news because my cholesterol is not very good right now. But but I'm pretty happy with some of my friendships. They also found that loneliness was as harmful to health, get this, as smoking or alcoholism. Yeah. And then it wasn't the number of relationships, but the quality. Feeling securely attached and able to rely on others that mattered the most. So it was like finally a robust study from a very reputable institution that demonstrates what we've known all along, that we are designed, created by God, made in the image of God and designed for relationship, for connection. And that the quality of our relationships is the strongest predictor of happiness, health, and longevity. So I wanted to ask the two of y'all, is there anything, just to get us started, is there anything you'd like to say to those tuning in today?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I notice is that, like, when I work with a lot of my clients, and a lot of my clients are in their midlife or, early 30s, late 30s, and then up into 50s, late 50s. And one of the first questions I always ask is, tell me about your support system. And what I notice with people is the smaller that support system gets, the more dysregulated they tend to be. And so as we don't have people to rely on or feel that they have our back, or people even that we're supporting, you tend to feel more dysregulated because we're wired for connection, and not having connection is stressful for us. And so noticing that, like, when you think about that question, like, what does my support system look like? Look at that and see, who do you have in your corner and what does that look like for you? And maybe is that an area that you need to beef up a little bit, right? Because it's a connection is a protective factor, and it's going to help you have good times, and also help you to get through bad times as well.
I think what I'll add to this is first the observation. I'm going to talk about this not just as a therapist, but as someone who struggles with this as well, in terms of investing into friendships. I probably fit that study that you mentioned, John, quite well. And so it's strange because I think from a clinical perspective, I understand it. Also, as a human being, as a person, I understand also the struggle with it as well. So, what I would say to people who are listening that struggle with that, I'm right there too. I get it. I sense a tension. And it's, as a mental health professional, we may know that this is a healthy thing to do, but I'll always invest in healthy things either. Right. So
Yeah.
that's a truism, I think, across the board in the industry. Right. So, I'll put myself in that bucket as well, but I'll in that way notice that what makes it difficult, at least for me, is that when we're younger, I think friendships are more organic. Like they're just easier to build. We have time. We don't have a lot of other external commitments. I'm sure life seems really busy and really hard for young adults. But I mean, when you start getting to the age of having kids and getting into adulthood, those pressures become more demanding. And yeah, relationships are one of the first things that go to the wayside. And so I get that. I'm right there as well. And so I'm sure we'll get into talking about all the reasons why and what we can do about that. But I just want to first say, hey, I get it because I feel that tension as well. And it's still important to talk through, like, if we can understand why and the implications of what happens when we don't, then maybe we can do just a little bit more. Maybe you can invest a little bit more. Not that we have to change everything, but we can maybe be intentional about investing a little bit better. So that's what I would say, just to maybe start off our conversation today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the devices thing, that experience I had at the restaurant, because I think that's very common. I mean, you see that everywhere. And part of me looks at that and is like, John, you're being old fashioned. It's not the device's fault. It's not technology fault. But I know there are lots of studies, right, about the influence of technology and how it's shaped our lives. And so let's talk a little bit about that. What is the impact of our devices on the way we connect with one another? What sort of boundaries are important there, if any? I imagine a lot of people have thought through those boundaries, but then I also imagine there are a lot of people who haven't really given thought to that because it's just a normal part of life now. And it's just, the kids want devices, the adults all have, so we're all so deviced up. And I don't know that we've had time to really step back and reflect on what is the impact of this on the quality of our relationships, and how do we get this, how do we have a healthy relationship with our devices and one another by extension?
I almost think that most one-on-one relationships now are actually 4 entities in that relationship because it's you and me and our phones. And so when you think about that, like, think about every time, like, we go out to dinner, you take your phone. If I leave the house without my phone, I, like, almost have a panic attack. So it's like, I have to go back. There's no question about it. I'm going back to go get my phone, right? Um, but when you're in a relationship with someone and it's actually 4 individuals in the relationship, there's always gonna be divided attention. And so the time that you spend on your phone is seeping away from the ability to connect with the person that you're actually in contact with, right? And so those micro moments of connection with your phone or with the person are always competing with each other. And you cannot feel like someone is fully present with you when they're always doing this, right? Or this, if this is bad too. So
Yeah. I mean, like, can we just take a step back and just highlight that the way these devices, the technology is developed is to grab as much of our attention as possible. They're designed for that, right? The intention is to, yeah, create usability, functionality. And so a lot of us, since the advent of the iPhone, these devices, it's created us an ecosystem in which we live in. And so it provides us an alternate reality, if you will, in which we can exist. And it is meant to be insular, right? To keep us in that space. And so many times, even now with social media, it it has commandeered a lot of our social relational experience as well, right? So there is something to just observe about that we are kind of in the midst of and have been for some time, up against the reality that these devices are kind of designed for that, right? And we have to work very intentionally against that, right? So yeah, I would just echo a lot of what Laura said, accounting for that and being aware that we have to be intentional to work against it if we're going to be able to make any strides at getting back to some level of grounding in our relationships, right?
Yeah. I like, Laura, that's interesting that you would describe the phone as another person, because that somehow makes it much more real and tangible, like in the system, right? Oh, this isn't just me and you. Now we have 4 individuals now. And then I think it's an interesting way to evoke greater awareness of, well, who's my attention going to in this moment? And I do remember, I'm not on social media anymore, personally, but I remember when I was, I would be with people that I loved and cared about, but my attention was on these people that maybe I haven't seen in years, or what they're doing, what they're eating, where they're going. And I remember there was this question posed to me, like, why are you spending more time attending to people that are very much at the periphery of your life? And the very people that you love and care about that are right in front of you, you are giving like 10% or 20% of your attention. And that was a very convicting thing. And that helped me to make some changes there. Are there any, practical suggestions you guys would offer that can help people navigate this? Because it is very tricky. There's a lot of gravitational pull.
yeah. I think so what I've noticed for me personally is, like, if I'm the passenger princess in the car, I tend to get on my phone and being very intentional about, because that's a time when you have captured attention, right? Which is you and your person or whoever in the car together, is to try and be way more intentional about about not doing that. For me, that's one of the goals that I have is when I get in the car with my husband to not immediately pull up my phone and just start scrolling because I have this uninterrupted time while he's driving. So, like, to try to engage in that. And I think, like, the easiest thing is, like, put down the phone, right? But you have to be so intentional about it because it's so much intertwined in a lot of our lives.
Yeah, I think we're sitting here. I'm sure everyone listening has heard be intentional and get off social media and unplug and don't look at your phone. And so I don't know if we're necessarily saying anything that like if you're listeners, you probably already resonate with that to some.
No groundbreaking news
Yeah.
here.
I think it probably, if it's me, I'm thinking about for myself, like what would it take? It would require me to really be bought into and understand the reason. I mean, the reason why I gravitate towards my phone is for a few different reasons. One is going to be for distraction. If I've had a long day, I just want to unplug. That's an easy out because I can control that environment, right? Another reason would be for productivity. I got work to do. And you can now do most everything you want to working on these things now, right? And so you have to let go of the need for productivity and to be okay with, hey, I'm not going to work right now. Or for the other guys you mentioned, John, these more superficial connection points that feel again more controllable, but they are more artificial. They pull you away from the immediate like reality in which you're in. And so it would require a decision to say those things, while are important, are not as important right now.
Yeah.
Right. And then to be able to make the commitment. So there has to be like almost a mindset shift around
Yeah.
how we value those things. Right.
Yeah.
Mm,
I'm hearing you
that's
say, like,
helpful.
almost like you have to create a value statement around being present. Like, the value of putting down the phone has to be greater than the value of the distraction or the productivity or whatever, and so that can be different for everybody, but working on what that statement is for you and why is that connection important?
Yeah. I'm thinking about just a very practical way of framing that is for those who are tuning in to think through this statement in this space. And so you designate a space at mealtime, around the dinner table, in the car, like you mentioned, Laura. So in this space, I would rather connect with my loved ones, and you fill in the. I would rather connect with my spouse, my children, my friends, than my friends on social media. So I know there's more that we could talk about there in terms of digital
Can I,
devices.
can
Oh
I
yeah,
just
go
add
ahead.
one more thing
Yeah.
in there? Is yeah, you just kind of reminded me just because most of what I do is couples counseling. This comes up a lot where there's a value statement. Hey, we're not going to do devices at the dinner table. But what will happen is if one person sees another person on the device, there's a subtle implied kind of rejection that, hey, I thought we were not going to do this thing.
Mm.
And so like I now feel rejected, so I'm going to do the thing. And now we have this loop. And that's how I think a lot of those things get tossed by the wayside because there's a subtle implied rejection that happens when we've made a commitment to say we're going to be available to connect with one another. Right.
Mm,
So there's a little bit of risk there, but it would be really good and helpful to just kind of say the obvious in there
yeah.
and say, hey, we need to stay committed to that because otherwise it will feel like I'm not important to you if you do that. Right.
Mm.
So what you're saying is don't tell my husband I'm not gonna be on the phone in the car?
Yeah. Because otherwise he's going to expect it. Now you're in trouble.
Accountability. Crap. That's good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the men and, the conversation I had with my guy friend and talk about I don't know, some distinctions or nuances with men and women. So there was this study, the American Perspective Survey in 2021, found that the percentage of men with no close friends had increased from 3% in 1990 to 15% in 2021. So the percentage of men who had no close friends went from 3% in 1990 to 15% in 2021. For women, the percentage with no close friends increased from 2% to 10%. And now for single men, the situation is even more pronounced. So for single men unmarried or not in a romantic relationship, the percentage increased to 20%. So 1 in 5 single men who said they had no close friends. The researchers called this the friendship recession, and it impacts men more pronounced in a much more pronounced way. What comes up for you guys is we consider those stats and this phenomenon. What do you see?
Well, first thing when I was listening to you read those stats, I'm wondering of the men who were married and have more close friendships than those who do not. I'm wondering how many of them have friends because their wives are making them have friends.
Touche.
I've had that conversation with my wife. She's like, "How come you don't have more friends?" And so a lot of my friendships come because she has like this
That's
community of
true.
people. Like, we're gonna hang out with your friends.
Yeah.
Okay, now
Yeah.
I've got a friend too. So I'm wondering how much of it is that. But I do. This may be interesting to just kind of unpack and talk about a little bit too, because like kind of uniquely, John, you and I have a friendship. Like we've known each other for like 25 years now, and
Yeah.
we met each other just after college. Um, and I'm thinking about, for a lot of men in this study, probably I'm thinking if it's similar to what's happening for me, is that a lot of friendships start off by virtue of our activities, what we do together, like how we spend time together, whether it's like through our church communities or sports or something along those lines. And again, as we get older, we don't have access to that as much. We don't have the ability to have, and so a lot of friendships go by the wayside because we no longer have a shared activity any longer, right? We have to be far more intentional. Say, hey, we're not going to get together to do something. We're going to get together to catch up and talk, which is a different language for a lot of men, right? And that may indicate the other reason why I think this is difficult is because when it moves from doing things together as a connection point to actually investing into each other's lives, there's a certain level of vulnerability. There's a certain level of authenticity, a certain level of emotional depth that those friendships have to be undergirded by. And that may not be something that a lot of men are comfortable with or know. How do you have a friendship like that? Right. And this probably like touches on maybe the last point I'll make on this one is that and I think this is true for men or women, that even more than just emotional connection, a lot of friendships have to be undergirded by the ability to go through struggle together, to go through differences and conflict together, right? And if we don't know how to do that, if we don't know how to go through our differences where like I'm hurt by something you did, John, or vice versa, if we're not familiar with that, a lot of those friendships will just go by the wayside because we don't have the ability to talk at a deeper level or to repair, right? And so it's easier to just not, right? And I think that's a general observation that we can make in today's culture of like, how do we handle differences? Like if I have a difference of opinion politically with you, John, like where does that friendship go? It probably just means that we won't talk, right? It probably means I will create distance as opposed to digging in and saying, hey, like what you said there, that may hurt me in a certain way. Can we talk about that? Like that's a whole different language set that I think that a lot of men just don't have access to or are not as familiar with.
I would agree with that. I think a generation behind you is doing better at this. Like I see the guys in their 20s and their 30s doing better at having emotional language. Um, but I think it's still a huge struggle for them because it requires friendship at that level requires you to be vulnerable. And that's not necessarily seen as masculine, being vulnerable. And then the other thing that you hit on was that it's a side by side relationship most of the time. And what you see, like even with your friend, like I'm focusing on my wife and my kids, and that's enough for me. And I would really, if he was sitting in my room and I was talking, I'd really push hard on that one for him. Because when you think about, okay, you're asking one person to carry all of your relational needs, asking one person to carry all of your emotional needs. And so that creates this vacuum where it can be too much and can make that relationship much more fragile than if you are able to spread out your emotional load. I know my husband really appreciates the fact that I have a lot of girlfriends that I can vent all my stuff out with and have these conversations with, rather than him having to carry all of that. Now he'd be willing to talk with me about those things, but boy, he doesn't want to talk about it as much as I want to talk about it. So I think looking at how do we continue to encourage our partner or other people in our lives to continue friendships, even when friendships seem like they're going to be hard to fit in. Being very intentional, I think for men, I think the best thing is a hobby or sports. You think about like what Lee was talking about, being able to carry that, go through a tough time together. When you compete with men, when men compete together, they're overcoming things together. It's the equivalent of going to battle with someone, right? And so that creates that camaraderie, and then you know you can rely and trust on that person because they were there for you when you were trying to make that big point or you were trying to get that score, or whatever it was, right? Or even with golf, they were there to encourage you when you were trying to make that last putt, or maybe not encourage you if you're betting. But the camaraderie of that creates closeness that when the tough time comes, that's a person you can go rely on because you know that they want the best for you. And so there's a change in there. But I think that what happens in a lot of marriages is it's like once the kids come, it sucks so much of the time and it feels like I need to be here for them because they're the most important thing instead of prioritizing yourself and your needs above the family in a way. Because if you don't have that emotional depth with other people, you're going to have to draw it from your family.
Yeah. Yeah. I, I'm thinking about, as with so many things, the change process. There usually has to be some sort of catalyst that prompts us to overcome the inertia. And so for a lot of men, it's, yeah, I need more community, but I don't feel like going out to join the small group that my church offers, or finding a new hobby just feels, signing up for that, activity group just feels too cumbersome. And it seems like everyone has to kind of come to a place where they are convinced of the importance of it and prompted to action. I know for myself, a few years ago, when I began my own therapy journey, one of the things, like almost every therapist is like, you need to invest in relationship. For a long time, my wife had been prompting me too, you need more connection. And I was just like, yeah, but that was the impetus for me to really invest more deliberately in friendship. And now, I mean, it's like my experience of community is so much richer and deeper than it was for the last couple decades. And hands down, I'm a better person as a result of that. Now, Lee, I've told you this, right? I mean, you're a part of that community and network of support. But I don't know that it would have come apart from that sense of desperation for it. And so I do wonder, for most men, is it one of those things where you have to go through some fire to just, get your butt in gear? Or is it that you realize that, gosh, apart from real authentic connections, I cannot be the man that God has called me to be, or the husband, father, et cetera, whatever role that you have that is important to you. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what can convince people to actually change. Sometimes it's like in God's timing. It does make me realize, though. I was just gonna say, I have stopped going, but there's a movement called F3. Have you guys heard of that?
Mm-mm.
So this is a shout out to F3. It stands for fitness, fellowship, and faith.
Mm.
And it's a group of men just organically connecting with each other. They gather every morning around 5 or 6 a.m. and they work out together. And it's like the pillar is like it has to be outdoors. It's rain or shine. And a friend of mine invited me to that, and I went, and it was really cool. I mean, it was just a group of guys that are coming together around fitness. And it happens to be, I think that the mean age is around mid-40s, because that's when a lot of guys are like, oh shoot, the belly is getting too big. I want it to be healthy. And so that becomes the uniting force. And then in the course of that, they develop fellowship, and they'll pray for each other. And it's something very special. It speaks to a zeitgeist and felt need that that's creating. So those guys, if you've never heard of that, check it out. F3. There's likely a workout group. It's free that meets in your neighborhood or community. I stopped going though because the fitness part was a little too hardcore for me.
You'll go, but John's not going anymore.
Yeah. That's my shabby plug.
That speaks really to that need to have a shared experience for men.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that women, like, our shared experience can be shopping or going to sit down and have lunch together. Like, it seems almost simpler in a way for women to connect in that way, whereas men almost need a structured activity to start building that bond. It's hard for most men, and y'all can tell me if I'm wrong because I'm not a man, to just like say, hey, let's go meet for lunch and like we'll just chat. I mean, would you guys find that to be a little odd if somebody?
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying about the language. Like we just don't have language for that. There's not a framework for that type of connection.
Yeah, and I think
you and I can do that, Lee. Right?
Well, you already have connection, though, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
but I think it's because men lack the relational language, but they don't lack the relational desire.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I think, and just not to discount to make it seem like it's so easy for women, because I think once you lose the child connection where you're forced into a relationship with other women because you have children of the same age, I see a lot of women as they get into their after kid stages where they lose a lot of relationships. So at that point, you have to be very intentional to maintain those relationships as an older woman.
Yeah.
Or
Because that's an activity as well. Like raising children together,
Right.
parenting, that's an activity that bonds as well, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Believe me,
Yeah.
nothing will bond you like a hard PTA.
So
Okay. Yeah.
I tell like my clients this in this way I frame it. Like it's gonna be choose your hard. It's all hard.
Mm,
Okay. So it's gonna be, do you spend 2, 3 hours in a week doing activity together so you can create connection and relationship? Do you spend like maybe an hour every other week having lunch with a friend to talk at a more deeper level? Or do you have a friendship that you can go through the struggle with and lean into some of the conflict that you may have to really make that relationship meaningful? Like all of those are hard. They require different levels of difficulty and different amount of time, right? And so which one is it going to be? And back to your point, John, because they're all potentially hard in different ways, we have to make a decision to invest in one of those three levels, if not more. And I agree, it usually does require some level of felt need to say,
Hmm.
okay, this is hurting me, right? And so therefore I have like working out, like a lot of people don't enjoy it until they realize, okay, something is wrong. I need to invest in this because it is for my long-term health, right?
yeah. And I would add to choose your heart. I like that phrase, that mentality. You could choose the heart of not having those connections and that support
Yeah.
system.
Hmm.
And your mental health, your emotional health, your relational health pays the price. And that is hard.
And I
That
would
is hard.
also even say that if you're married, your marriage will pay the price for that,
Yeah,
because
that's right.
it creates a tension, like I said earlier, that tension of like all of my needs have to be met through this one person.
And there's no way.
Yeah,
There's
there's
no
no
way.
way. It's too
There's no way.
much.
Yeah. I think, Lee, you brought up this idea of vulnerability. That is something that, I mean, probably in the last several years, Brene Brown has been really key in that the language of vulnerability is a lot more common, is my sense. And so we're told that healthy, strong leaders with EQ demonstrate vulnerability, healthy vulnerability, that it's critical in relationships. Uh, let's talk a little bit more about what vulnerability, what are some practices that help foster healthy vulnerability? Because going back to the device thing, I think in some level, it's easy for people to just be very vulnerable or just blurt out stuff on social media. And then sometimes you're like, whoa, like, I don't know that they need to be sharing that in this setting. Or maybe you've heard people, in a public platform share something very vulnerable. But it does make me wonder, what are some ways that the average person tuning in can think about vulnerability and practice it in a way that is actually conducive to the kind of quality of relationships that we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll say that the implication behind vulnerability is risk. Like if you're really vulnerable, there's a risk involved. There's a potential that what you're sharing could be weaponized, it could be turned against you in some way, you could be rejected. And so because if it's not really risky, then it's not really vulnerable. But that implies then you have to be wise about the way you are vulnerable, because there are some situations in which you should be able to say, like, yeah, like if I share this, this person is not a safe person, or this environment is not a safe environment, right? And so it does require, this is part of the work, this is part of the heart. You have to discern in which friendships am I willing to risk a little bit to see, like, how will they show up? How will they respond to this? Right. Um, and I think my suspicion is that most of the time with the friends that you have in your circle, that if you show up a little bit more vulnerably, they'll take care, and they'll respect that vulnerability, and they'll respond well. And that's encouraging. That allows you to be able to say, okay, I can risk a little bit more. Right. But I do think that that's part of like maybe the initial step of thinking through, what am I willing to risk, and am I willing to try and risk a little bit with some of these friendships to see what comes from that.
Yeah, and that can get really hard too, because you're right. I don't think you can be in a long-term friendship and not have a time when you don't get hurt in that friendship. right? There's going to be a time that that person lets you down, doesn't show up the way you need them to show up, says something that hurts your feelings. And then it's all about, are you able to repair with that person? Can you guys come back together and not look for perfection in each other, but look for the ability to say, hey, when you said that, that really hurt me and I want to understand that better. What was going on there? Or did I miss something that was going on with you so that you couldn't show, really having those conversations and being willing to hold each other accountable toward the friendship, right? Because the repair matters way more than getting it right, because that builds trust that we can then show up in vulnerability through the repair, and that we both lead with curiosity and lead with the ability to be like, hey, we want this, we value the relationship, so let's figure out what happened there so we can move forward from it. And I think where a lot of people who've been hurt a lot, especially in their family of origin, have so much struggle allowing people close, because the risk of hurt and how much they've been hurt in the past causes them to be stuck from developing longer, deeper relationships in their adult lives.
Can you say more about that?
Well,
Yeah.
well, I think what you see is as you've been taught that being close to someone or needing love from someone means punishment or rejection, then trying to enter into those relationships as an adult is very difficult, because you're automatically assuming you're going to get punishment or rejection. And so when you don't get punishment or rejection, you don't necessarily trust it. You wonder, okay, well, what's the ulterior motive? Why are they being nice to me? Why are they investing in me? Because that doesn't seem right or safe. I'm used to this and I'm getting this. So then consistency over time can sometimes overcome that. But it's really that awareness that you have to build in yourself of hey, I need to notice that what happened to me back there isn't aligning with what I'm experiencing here. So I have to be really curious about why that's true. And maybe those things that I believe about relationship that were established by these toxic relationships in my past may not be true now in this relationship. But maybe this person isn't toxic, and trying to separate those two things. And we've talked about unblending before
Right.
in previous episodes. This is another example of how what you experience in your family of origin creates how you interpret people in the world. And those people may not be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. That's helpful. Yeah. I think I've heard, for example, Ashley Brene Brown talk about who has earned the right. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your story. And I always thought that was helpful, because as someone who's struggled with boundaries, is like, well, I think being kind to people means everyone gets to hear my story, but that's not the case. And now you guys added that nuance of, it's not that someone or friend has been a perfect friend. It's that when there has been a rupture, when there has been a hurt or wound or harm done, there is evidence of the ability to repair. Now, if that is lacking, that becomes evidence that maybe that person is not the best person to take that risk with. So I like that.
Can I add one more thing? I know we're talking about this from the standpoint of how we move into these spaces in more of a friendship context, but you mentioned something earlier, John, around healthy and effective leaders are lead with vulnerability, and I want to observe that for a second, because I think there's something about that in terms of something that could motivate us to push our relationships a little bit more, which is that if you have the courage to be vulnerable, you can lead into some of these relationships and creating more depth. Because when you are willing to lead with vulnerability and share yourself, the natural response from most people is, I can connect with that, right? But they need to see you make the first move. They need to know that you're willing to do that before they're willing to do that, right? So sometimes it does require for some of these relationships to go to that level, to lead into it, to take that first move, and to demonstrate this is the way it could work. This is the way we could connect, right? And so I think that may add another wrinkle in terms of how we show up in these environments, and being willing to risk ourselves, right?
That's good. It's like each of us has that agency. We are empowered to make that first move. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be a little step, and we see how the other person responds. But I have also found too, in my experience, generally when I take that risk, the other person responds in kind, and the relationship is the stronger for it, which is really cool. Um, yeah. So what other micro habits or big habits or mindsets would you guys like to encourage our leaders to consider adopting or trying to integrate into their lives um, to
I
foster greater connection?
I would say that to remember that, like, this is a felt need, a desire that all of us have, is for connection, and not to discount it, and to notice, like when that need is not getting met in your life, and be really, again, we're gonna use the word intentional, because but I think that's, you have to be. You have to think of it as an investment instead of like something that's taking away from something else in your life. You're investing in someone else, and you're also investing in the health of all of your other relationships by spreading your network a little bit. And, it doesn't have to be friends with 500 people, but you need to have a core group of like 3 to 5. And I would say, think about that, because it's like, I use this analogy a lot. You look at Jesus, he had 12 disciples, but he had 2 to 3 close people, right? People that he would ask to pull away with him. And so if Jesus needs 3, you might need 5. So so think about that. But also just be intentional and allow yourself to lean in. Notice a place where you can lean in, a friendship that maybe is kind of a little bit on the periphery, but you kind of vibe with that person and you feel like might be a good connection. Ask for a little bit more from that connection and just see what happens.
Yeah, I would say this may not be like a micro step because it feels like maybe maybe a larger step. But the thing I think of when I think about making a step in this direction is being aware that we all carry different masks. We have personas and in which we show up in, and the willingness to be aware that underneath that is something that's more not just vulnerable, but potentially more weak, more broken, and the willingness to be aware of that and to share that, and the willingness to say I can take that mask off. Um, and so I think to make the micro maneuver here in my mind is being aware that you show up with different personas. And that's fine. I mean, that makes sense. We have to do that in our world and in reality. But when you're aware of that, you're also aware when I can actually take that mask down and to share myself, right? It just requires awareness, right? That's probably going to be the first step, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm aware of our time, so I'm going to begin to land this plane. So um, there's a lot to consider here. And obviously it's not, we don't have steps 1, 2, 3 to develop a good connection and relationship, but some very important mindset shifts that that I think that I think will really help and encourage people. So to recap some of the things I wrote down, one way to think of this, Laura, I think you mentioned expanding your support system. And when you said 3 to 5, part of me felt a little stressed, like, oh, that's a lot. If you have 0, going to 3 to 5 that's huge. So maybe 1 to 2, be realistic, but expand your support system.
Interesting, men and women right there.
Yeah. Lee, you challenged us. I mean, the reality is choose your hard. Not doing this is you're choosing a hard path, and to do this is a hard path. But which would you rather have? Would you rather be alone and health failing, or at the end of your life happy and fulfilled because you've invested over the course of decades into relationships? And so whether you're listening, you're just at the start of your adult life or midway through or at the towards the latter half of your life, it's never too late to begin to take some of those steps to invest. I like that analogy. Because intentionality, yes. I think sometimes we're like, yes, we need to be intentional and it feels burdensome, but investing is really important. We want to invest in the things that will reap reward in our lives, and connection, community is I don't know. It's the best investment, right? Our connection with God and with one another. And then I think just really practically considering how each of us might make the first move to be vulnerable in a relationship that is safe and where there is trust. These are themes and topics we will continue to explore because they're so vital to our health and our living whole lives. So, thank you, both of you guys, for the insights you shared today. And so those of you tuning in, thanks again for being with us. As always, we want to close with this encouragement. May God bless you and strengthen you as you do the work. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to The Work Within. We hope this show blessed you in some way. Please subscribe and leave us a review. Your support means a lot to us. Finally, if you're looking for a therapist, we'd love to help. Visit us at www.watershedinitiative.com to get started. For a limited time, new clients can receive 10% off their first 5 sessions of therapy by mentioning The Work Within. Join us again next time.